Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we are going to unpack the legal and structural intricacies of real estate development. If you've ever looked up at a massive city skyline and wondered how all those random individual plots of land somehow transformed into these towering megastructures, well, it all comes down to a very specific legal framework. We're going to explore exactly why developers absolutely need property rights to build our cities and how they partner up with landowners to make the whole thing happen.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. Part 1, the joint development solution. Part 2, defining development agreements. Part 3, why developers need rights. Part 4, managing society redevelopment. And finally, Part 5, taxation and legal safeguards.
Section 1, the joint development solution, pooling resources for success.
So think about an empty plot of land, or maybe a really dilapidated building. On its own, it's just raw potential, right? The fundamental problem here is usually capital. The person who owns the land rarely has the massive amount of funds required to actually develop it, and conversely, the person with the funds doesn't own the land. So on one side, we have the landowner bringing the physical asset, the space itself. On the other side, the developer brings the financial capital, the construction expertise, and the project management skills. When these two join forces, they create a single, powerful joint venture. They pool their resources to pull off this monumental task that neither of them could really do alone.
When they formalize this partnership through what's called a Joint Development Agreement, or JDA, the benefits are just huge. Honestly, it's the ultimate win-win scenario. For the developer, it completely saves them the massive initial investment of buying the land outright, not to mention major stamp duty costs. And for the landowner or the housing society, it means fast-paced development, fair consideration, and it avoids tying up funds for members who just need alternate accommodation. It perfectly bridges that gap between raw land and a finished skyline.
Section 2. Defining development agreements, beyond basic construction.
Now, you might be wondering, what actually separates a high-stakes real estate developer from, say, a regular construction contractor? Well, it's a really crucial distinction. See, in a pure construction contract, the owner simply pays a contractor for labor and materials. The contractor has literally zero interest in the land. They just build the thing and collect a fee. But in a development agreement, the developer actually acquires a valuable right in the property, or the newly constructed area itself. This could be structured as area sharing, or the rights to direct sales. And it's exactly this transfer of rights that makes taking on the massive financial risk of a mega project actually worthwhile for the developer.
Section 3. Why developers need rights, the core of the project.
So the crucial point is, without the transfer of actual property rights, the entire development ecosystem falls apart completely. We do have to get into a tiny bit of legal jargon here, but it's super fascinating to see how this works in practice. When a JDA is signed, the developer gains what's known as de facto, or actual physical possession of the land. They need complete physical control of the site to bring in the bulldozers, pour concrete, and do their job, right? However, they operate under the de jure, or legal possession, which stays with the landowner until the project is totally finished. It's this really delicate balance of physical control versus legal title.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the law actually views that transfer of control. In the landmark Chatterbridge Dwarkadas Kapadia case, the courts basically said that if a contract passes complete control over the property to the developer, that date of contract is what actually triggers the legal chargeability or taxability of the project. It just goes to show how incredibly powerful and legally binding that physical de facto possession is in the eyes of the law.
To actually make a project successful, the development agreement has to grant some very specific, non-negotiable rights. The developer needs a general power of attorney to apply for government sanctions and sell undivided shares. They need the ability to utilize transfer of development rights, or TDR, and get extra floor space index. They absolutely need force majeure protection against unpredictable disasters. But maybe most importantly, they need the right to mortgage. Without the right to mortgage that property, the developer simply cannot secure the millions in financing required from banks to even get the project off the ground.
Section 4. Managing society redevelopment, navigating human friction. We've talked a lot about legal theory so far, but what happens when you aren't just dealing with a single landowner, but an entire housing society, full of diverse people and differing opinions? How do these sweeping agreements survive all that human friction? Well, to ensure everyone is protected, the law sets up a really structured democratic process. First, the society appoints a project management consultant to assess the project's feasibility. Second, they invite and evaluate tenders from various developers. Third, and this is the big one, they have to convene a special general meeting and obtain a 51% majority approval to appoint a specific developer. And finally, once that democratic mandate is secured, they execute the definitive, legally binding development agreement.
But you might be asking, what about the people who say no? Well, the courts have set a very powerful precedent here, most notably in the Aditiraj Builders case. The judiciary has repeatedly affirmed that minority members simply cannot obstruct a redevelopment that has already been approved by the majority. Once that 51% threshold is met, dissenting members no longer have the power to unilaterally block the project. If they refuse to vacate, courts have even gone so far as to authorize court-appointed receivers to take possession. This ensures that the developer's rights, and ultimately the will of the majority, are legally protected against holdouts.
Section 5. Taxation and Legal Safeguards. Protecting the Partnership.
Now, obviously, all this transferring of massive property rights, taking over society buildings, and securing mortgages, it doesn't just happen in the Wild West. It is heavily guarded by state regulations to protect everyone involved. First and foremost, we have RERA, the Real Estate Regulatory Authority. Under this framework, transparency is absolutely paramount. Both the developer and the landowner can actually be held accountable as promoters of the project. And this ensures that the end buyer, the person actually purchasing the new flat, is fully protected from delays or mismanagement.
Then, of course, there is the taxation element, specifically GST. The tax implications in these agreements are super highly structured. In a typical joint development agreement, GST is actually triggered across 3 distinct types of transactions between the builder and the landowner. This ensures the government successfully tracks and taxes the massive amount of value being created on the site.
Furthermore, none of this is legally valid on just a handshake. The overarching joint development agreement absolutely must be registered. It attracts significant stamp duty and has to comply strictly with state laws like the Maharashtra Stamp Act. That secures the legal footing of the entire multi-million-dollar endeavor.
However, the law does sometimes provide a really helpful financial break for individual citizens. Let's return to that Aditiraj Builders case we discussed earlier. The Bombay High Court clarified this wonderful detail for society members. When individual members sign permanent alternate accommodation agreements, or PAAAs, to secure their new flats during a redevelopment, these documents are exempt from separate, heavy stamp duty beyond just 500 rupees. They're basically treated as additional instruments to the already stamped MAN agreement, which saves residents a pretty significant amount of money.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder. We walk past construction sites every single day, but we rarely see the complex web of trusts, rights, and legal precedents that actually make them possible. So, how does this delicate balance of property rights, between a single landowner holding the deed and a developer holding the capital, ultimately dictate the future skyline of our cities? Because, at the end of the day, it is these invisible contracts that literally build the world around us. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this really fascinating topic. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.